Good morning, everyone, or evening, depending on which time zone you're in. It's midnight here for me, Rod Hutchings from Melbourne, Australia. So I'm really looking forward to our panel today on building a learning organisation and fostering continuous growth and adaptability. So as businesses around the world are navigating increased complexity, dynamic changes happening all the time, you need to be adapting with that, to go along with that, to be right, to be ahead. So today we've got an amazing group of panelists who are going to help us with this conversation, and let's bring them forward, please.
Hello. Hello.
Hello,
Hello.
how you going, Frank, Melissa, and Wayne? All right. So to get us started, let's just, if you want to just introduce yourself just quite briefly, and what fascinates you with this topic would be a good start. And so over to you, Frank, to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello. Happy Friday, Junior, as this is being live to all those that are listening and dialing in, etc. And my familiar panelists and Rod, great seeing you again. Frank, I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm based here in the U.S. Central Time Zone, so it's about mid-morning for myself. I'm a father, I'm a husband, head of equity, inclusion, and belonging for Young Brands. It's both a stateside international lens there. What fascinates me, I personally have always loved learning. I will find time to learn about learning, videos about learning, read books about learning, and just other types of things. And I enjoy it. I also love facilitating. I'm the person that will have the music playing and have energizers and kind of lower the tension so that we can raise retention. So I think that's really, really important to be excited so other people are excited.
Thanks, Frank. And welcome, Melissa.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I think I want to say I want to go to Frank's class because it sounds really
sounds
awesome.
exciting. Yes.
My name is Melissa Janis. I'm delighted to be here. I am a leadership development consultant, and I focus primarily on working with managers and building their capabilities. And I do that in two ways. I work with one-to-one. I provide personal training for new managers who are high stakes and absolutely positively need to get up to speed. And I also work with small to mid-sized businesses that have outgrown their homegrown approach to developing their managers. So that's the space that I'm working in. I started in learning 100 years ago. And what's really exciting about being in learning today, this is a great, great time to be in learning, because when I started, it was classroom training. You were one and done, and there was a right way to do things. And once you were trained, you were good to go, and you never saw the training department again. And that's not the case anymore. Like, the industrial age is finally over. There's not one good way to do something. The right way today may not be the right way tomorrow. They may not even be a right way tomorrow. They might just be a better way tomorrow and a better way after that. So this is this incredibly wonderful time where learnings become integral to the success of the organization. And it's a very exciting time to talk about that.
That was a great introduction, and thanks, Melissa, and welcome to Wayne.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Pleasure to be here. I always love hacking HR events, learn a lot of things. I've been in the learning development space for a while. In fact, I was working with a friend of mine. You may have heard of him, Socrates, on some different ideas a couple thousand years ago. I am kind of older, but but I have ideas. Been in HR for many years. I teach at the University of Pennsylvania, course on two courses. One's on agile leadership. We're going to be adding an AI component, and every year I kind of change my syllabus because I feel that I have changed, and so if I have changed, I need to focus on different things. My students have changed, and so it's a challenge, because you have to keep reinventing yourself. But that's who I am. It's in my DNA. I can't help myself. I see growth. I took a slight diversion into IT. I actually worked as a Scrum Master for IBM and Comcast where I came up with the Agile idea. I saw that Agile worked in software development, and I've been on a mission for about 6 years to bring non-IT Agile-like concepts to the HR space. Things like experimentation, breaking things down, incremental work, and helping HR departments be Agile versus do Agile. I talked to a lot of leaders. Well, we're doing scrums. Well, doing Scrum once a week for 3 hours, that's not really an Agile. And so the beauty of Agile really releases the human spirit. Every time we've taught this, whether workshop or class, people have epiphanies. They think about things differently because Agile allows you to be yourself and to be able free to have conversations that perhaps you couldn't have otherwise. So I'm looking forward to the learning from others as well as the audience, and thanks for inviting me.
Thanks, Wayne. And last but not least, and we're just introducing yourself and what fascinates you of the topic.
Okay. Well, hello everyone. My name is Sandy. I'm, just like Wayne was saying, I love doing the HR hacking events because we definitely learn a lot. And you always get to take home some little nuggets that you can practice, whether it's from the audience or from, our fellow panelists. So, and the reason why this topic is such a crucial topic in my perspective is because for me, I love to learn. So how do you learn? By, trying all kinds of different things. And if I'm that way, I get bored when I stop learning at a job, right? So I put myself in their perspective. So if I'm kind of getting bored, obviously that's going out there as well. So I always try to make sure that we're, introducing new topics, little nuggets that we can send out, whether it's something along the lines of maybe perhaps an weekly email where we're like, hey, make sure you do this, make sure you do that, or here's a good way of a new learning way, right? Whether it's 10 tips to be a better visual learner or whatever the case might be, right? But I think it's just the continuation of always introducing new materials, new things, new ideas helps not just the individual that's introducing them, but also those that are receiving it. And it helps, with growth. And we get a lot back from the employees as well. So I think it's a win-win situation.
Thank you, and welcome everyone once again. That was an amazing introduction. This is going to be a wonderful panel. And to get us started, I'm going to ask Melissa to get us started on the first question. And the first question that I want to sort of tackle is just a sort of setting it up sort of question. And that is, what are the core characteristics that define a true learning organization, and how can organizations ensure they embody these traits? So over to you, Melissa.
Great, thank you. I'm so happy to tackle this first question. It might take the hour. No, I'm only kidding, but I'll pare it down because we really could just on this one thing. So I like to be really purposeful. So if we take that step back and say, so what is the purpose of a learning organization, right? And at the heart of it, it's really about mobilizing the workforce to improve and drive business success over time, which involves making sure that the organization can adapt to this ongoing onslaught of change and drive sustainable success. So what are the kinds of characteristics that make that happen, right? And so it's about trend spotting. So the employees at all levels need to be curious and constantly on the outlook for new information that they bring into the organization. They need to be knowledge sharing across the organization, like forget silos. We need to constantly sharing, here's what I'm sensing, here's what I'm picking up, what do you make of it? And ideating with that to make sense of what they're hearing. Right? They need to have the professional courage to challenge the status quo. So the more the organization can create psychological safety and make it safe to say, the easier it is for people to come forward and share what they're hearing so that they can ideate and innovate And I think the last thing I would add here, because I don't want to give a whole course on it, because I know there's so many other aspects to this, but I think one of the pieces of this that often isn't brought up that's really important is that decision-making has to be driven deeper into the organization. Because if people are sensing and picking up and ideating based on their successes and failures, they need to be able to make decisions closer to where their responsibility lies. And that's going to help with flexibility and the speed organizations need to really be true learning organizations, so they can be feeding that information up as well as down. The other piece of that humongous question that Rod asked was, how can organizations embody these traits, right? And I think there's two key things. One is that I already mentioned psychological safety. Without psychological safety, none of this works, because you have to feel that you can share your thoughts, even your word salad, without concern for adverse repercussions, that you're not going to be ridiculed in any way or punished in any way, that bringing up ideas is a good thing. And that means that leaders need to ensure that they respond well when people bring things up. It's one thing when leaders say, oh, we welcome ideas, bring your ideas. Where they have to check themselves is when somebody brings a bad idea. And how do you handle that and value that they brought the idea, but not necessarily value the idea's substance? So there's a what and how there. The other thing is to manage this as a strategic change initiative, not a learning initiative. So don't forego that stakeholder analysis, because that's what gives us the ability to deal with the resistance and get the buy-in that we need downstream with leadership who needs to model these key behaviors. Really, we're really talking about behavior change. So if we want organizations to embody these traits, there needs to be alignment through the organization. Leaders need to role model and coach. And then finally, of course, the big one is measure, because that which gets measured gets done. And I know we'll be talking more about measurement later, but it's key. How you measure this will also drive the behaviors that you're looking for.
That was a very comprehensive answer, so thank you for that. So, now, anyone want to add on any little bits?
No, that was great. Hard to come after somebody like that, but I'll try. What it comes down to is having a generative culture. There's pathological, there's bureaucratic, there's generative, and most organizations are more bureaucratic. And you have to, typical of a generative culture is, risk taking. We don't shoot the messenger, we encourage the messenger. We provide continuous learning opportunities. We model the right behaviors. And your culture is a very large amorphous thing, but I think the key for me is the leader behavior. Does a leader demonstrate that they're open to this? Do they, as Melissa was saying, are they receptive to things that maybe people don't agree with, or problems that come up? And do they model it? Is the leader continually learning? Are they stopping meetings and saying, oh, let's think about that a second, What about respect? What do we think about that? How can we learn from that? Are they having micro sessions where maybe 10 minutes in a meeting, they focus on learning something? Are they doing retrospectives after things to kind of look back and say, all right, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? What can we learn from it? So really, as everything in the organization relates to, it has to deal with some culture, generating a generative culture.
Thanks, Wayne. Frank?
No, wow. So made it really well. It's like you were thinking what I was thinking, Melissa, and even Wayne. I want to double click on the measurement, and then also the psych safety piece for sure. The curiosity, and then what kind of subdues that or decreases that is the lack of psych safety and making mistakes, innovation and ideation, and somewhere in between as learners, right? We've probably seen like a lot of visual models around this comfort, change, etc., right? But then the opposite of curiosity that you said, I love that, might be closed. And there's a measurement around that for your organization. And I think the double click here would be dependent on, are you looking as an outsider as a consultant, possibly, navigating and trying to get hired for that organization, et cetera. There's an assessment for you there. And then there's an assessment, I think, for you within the organization. I would say as you approach an organization, right? I think it's not the inventory and catalog of all the programs they have. I think it's some sort of inventory or question that you can ask of, within all these programs and experiences that you've had, what kind of innovations, ideations, inventory, catalog have you had that have led to some sort of change? And has it been implemented? And that's always going to pause people, because like they always love, you think about like Kirkpatrick model of learning, we love to, and I get it, it's a marketing and advertising, like we always focus in on the emotional reaction, and people loved it. High attendance, high energy, and then it just kind of dissipates, right? So I think depending if you're outside, but if you're inside, Melissa said something great, and Wayne, you said something great too about the encouragement of kind of the naysayer, the messenger. But Melissa, you also said about, this piece around the behaviors. So I think as an internal person, whether you are actually in L&D, OD, and you don't have all those surveys, is to really look at the model behavior of your most senior person in your function. And if you really, really want to get hardcore, go all the way up to your CEO. They say this one or two lines, but in the town halls and updates, how you learn, oh, I'm a lifelong learner. Okay, did they bring up a book? Did they recommend a podcast? Did they attend some of these learnings to be seen around us commoners, right? Like, where do they share it? And I have seen a success story like that. And then that model behavior is organizational culture right there. Your most senior leaders' behavior and personality, not the value statements on the board. Those behaviors will absolutely be modeled down. And then I would just say what Wayne was saying is about, or add, that is, how is that then rewarded and recognized? And not always by money, by the way, but how is that rewarded and recognized within us commoners down here, right?
No, really good addition there, Frank. And I think we've spoken a little bit about measurement, and measurement does probably drive a lot of how people get rewarded as well. And I'm before we move on, I'm just wondering, what are some of the indicators to look for in measurement when we're talking about this topic about being a learning organization? And I'll just open that question to anyone on the floor. So just really about focusing on the indicators. What type of things can be measured? Would like to jump in?
I would offer that the engagement survey is a really great way to capture some information, some key data from the population. To what extent are they learning and growing every day, right? To what extent are there one-to-ones with their managers helping them improve? How frequently are they discussing their development, right? If you can tap into some of that, and maybe ask an open-ended question around that, you may get some really juicy data to help you understand where the bright spots are in the organization, and leaders that can be emulated, and those who might need some assistance in making the shift.
Thanks, Melissa. Anyone else got anything? Wayne?
One of the things that I've been thinking about, and it's more of a long-term approach, is there's an internal versus external hire, right? We typically hire on the outside because we don't have the skills inside. And as we start to upskill people correctly, I wonder if that's going to shift, that we're going to have more internal development and less external hiring. So, there's a couple companies that focused on internal marketplaces. I think it's still early on in the process, but to me, that's a more long-term macro indication. If we can start to hire more internally, that shows that we are a learning organization, we are developing people versus having to go outside for those talents, especially as talent differentiates us. We need different kinds of talent and skills, right? Are we going to develop our own, which promotes, verifies that we're a learning organization, or are we going to have to go outside?
That's a really good point, Wayne. And anyone else? No, we might move on to the next question. I think we've spent a lot of time there. So, all right. So, and I'm going to come to Sandy on this one, which is how can learning initiatives be aligned with the broader business strategies to ensure they contribute to the overall business outcomes and goals, objectives? So, how would you want to get us started on that question?
Okay. One good thing to do is a learning matrix, right? And you can take it either by role or depending on how. One big factor I think is definitely industries, and each industry is going to have a slight different variation of it, but I think a learning matrix is a big, huge indicator, right? Because if, let's say, for example, your tech one needs to know about part A, B, and C, how to make it, but your tech two is focused on part D and E and so forth, right? Because they've already mastered the other three or whatever parts. I think that is a key foundation to be able to align it with the goals, right? With the company objectives, with those would go hand in hand with each other. The other thing with how to make sure that that's the case is when you're doing your performance reviews. Okay, here are the the goals for you when it comes down to development. This is what I want to see, and actually being able to open it up and and allowing for that to happen, right? Making sure that you budget properly for it so that everything is in alignment. Let's say, for example, we do have government programs like the EPT, right? Where you're allowed to, you're given a certain dollar amount and you're able to kind of utilize that to be able to do trainings. Being able to, when you don't have the budget, because I know a lot of our viewers will also ask, well, what if you don't have the budget? I'm a small company. Well, guess what? There's definitely stuff out there you can do. Look up EPT. They will definitely, it's a process. I will tell you, I've been there, but you have other resources that can be able to help to be able to actually utilize funds to get reimbursed for those trainings that you do with your staff. And then not making sure that you don't just cater it, or that you don't just do it to one way, that you cater it to how the culture is within your business, in your organization. Because I might be a visual learner, but I might, like, especially like in the manufacturing and industry, sometimes the employees that we have are not as tech savvy, right? And so if you're trying to get them to go through a training and be clicking, typing questions, and they're like, I've never used a computer in my life, so making sure that you are also taking that into account. Yes, these are the goals, but how can I make sure that even my non-computer tech savvy person can also be able to, to take those trainings, take advantage of that, help them grow, help them learn, but also, making sure that it's in alignment. And I think setting up those goals, like Melissa was saying, those one-on-ones, super key, super important, and making sure that, because here's the thing, in reality, in every organization, you might set goals the first quarter. By second quarter, even by next month, sometimes even next week, those goals are gone, right? Because it shifted. And so I think those one-on-ones are super crucial, because this way you can keep shifting as the company shifts. You can keep shifting, and you can continue to make sure that you guys are staying in alignment with what the goals and the objectives are for the business.
Thanks.
Yeah, I like the one-on-one concept by Sandy. I think that's excellent. One of the challenges I've always had with HR is they don't really understand the voice of the customer. They don't listen to the customer. The beauty of Agile is that your customers evolve all the time, everything you do. And so to me, it's a co-creation concept. Any learning and development goal should be developed in conjunction with the business leaders who have a business need. How is your learning development program helping them achieve those goals? And that's really conversations. It's involving them in the process. I can't tell you how many times I've seen HR department come up with this great idea. They spent months on it, and then no one really wanted it. Why? Because they hadn't really tested the marketplace. It hadn't involved leaders early on and ongoing. A lot of people have a conversation at the beginning of a project. This is great. Keep going. 6 months later, deliver it, and they say, well, I don't want this. What is this? Because they haven't had those interim conversations as they go along. As Sandy was saying, things change so much. If you're not having continual, frequent conversations with your stakeholders, you're liable to produce something that you like, but they don't.
Thanks, Wayne.
So a lot of gold in that from both of you, Cindy and Wayne. And I love that you brought up performance management, because one of the levers, and to Wayne's point around HR, and in defense of my HR colleagues, everything needs to be aligned if we're going to move forward. You don't fight a war from one direction. And so one of the things that I did in the past was redefined the 9-cell in talent management. So rather than it being performance and potential, it was really performance and learning agility. We defined potential as the 9 elements of learning agility. And so that changed the conversation around what it meant for somebody to have potential. And that connected then to the business strategy. So it's not necessarily coming up with a new initiative, but look at all the levers that you have that exist already and figure out, where can we make adjustments? I mean, think about it. This is really the same thing as being a learning organization, right? It's modeling that very behavior, getting the input, as Wayne would suggest, right? Doing that stakeholder analysis, bringing them along, but tweaking the stuff you already have in place and improving it to drive better outcomes is really the name of the game.
Yes, some really great inputs, and it sort of got me reflecting on like some organizations have very structured development paths for individuals, and so when someone's been there for 10 years, they jump out and go and work somewhere else for a number of years. You've still invested a lot in them. If you want to bring them back, how do you bring them back without and take on what they've learned somewhere else? For some organizations, like I'm from the Air Force, that's quite challenging to actually embrace someone who's actually left and come back. What are your thoughts on those sort of barriers? How do you be agile that you just don't hold on to your own plan, so you can really get the total workforce, get the benefit from what you've invested previously? Any ideas on that challenge? Or have you seen that challenge before?
Well, I think in the old days, not with Socrates, but maybe 10, 15 years ago, you would never hire someone who left. They're a traitor, they didn't believe us. But now organizations have alumni associations. Why? Because they want to stay connected to their employees, because they're likely to come back. It's just a kind of different mindset around that. Obviously, you want to know why someone left. That's a good piece of data that provides some clues. Perhaps you're underperforming in a certain area, you're not competitive salary-wise, or the company that they went to had more learning opportunities. But I would never preclude anybody from coming back because they're talented, they know your organization, and so in some ways they'd be a better hire than someone who has no familiarity with the organization.
Thanks, Wayne. Anyone else got any thoughts on that question?
I think there's a lot of value in boomerangs, and right, it's just, they've gone out, they've experienced other things, and they've come back perhaps enlightened and have some valuable information for the organization. It used to be that you were disloyal if you left, but great managers now encourage their people to develop and be where it's best for them. And a lot of people do come back because it seemed like the grass was greener and it kind of wasn't. but they come back having grown. And so why not?
Yep. Thanks, Melissa. All right, we might jump on to the next question, which I'm going to come to Frank on. And that is, what are some of the barriers to fostering growth and adaptability, and how might we help organizations overcome these? So over to you, Frank.
No, and we're getting a lot of comments in the chat, so I do see those. Thank you all for that. A lot of kind of affirmations from what's being said. Gosh, and I actually would love to hear from the tenure of Socrates, Wayne, and Melissa, say 100 years or so, right? There's been a lot of things with that. I would approach a few things, and then I would love to just hear from the insights of fellow panelists. Is when I think about things and forward, I also kind of get a catalog or inventory of what's the opposite or the barriers and challenges. And it's already been said, but when I think growth and adaptability, I start thinking about words like regression, being very stagnant, very rigid, a little bit antiquated, and a lot of our own personal comfort zone, right? Actually, I believe it was folks love to prescribe to IO psychologist Adam Grant, really popular, right? He talks about even like AI, and a lot of our cataloging of past learnings is really it's really trained towards like patterns of the past, and not necessarily a future forward diagnostic approach. So I think having that inventory of the past is great. It informs, but may not be necessarily forward thinking all the time. It is a great indicator of individual behavior, though. So I don't want to devalue past, right? Because we do repeat as humans and history, et cetera. But I think two basic things, and one's been said already. First one is just connection in general. It helps us navigate change, emotions, experiences, short-term routines, this connection. So it's almost within your learning matrix, within your learning agility plan and box, whatever it may be that you help develop, is what's our connection and relationship routing within this, right? And then don't even define that piece of it, kind of like co-creation, what Wayne was saying. That's the huge one right there. Is connection will help you navigate any of those changes for your organization and help you be more forward. I think the other piece is just psych safety. So I won't say that, but I think just I won't go deep, but just the mistakes and reduction of fear, allowing mistakes and will help reduce fear. But I think just kind of you want a systematic approach and this is an inspiration from Dr. Randall Pickett, his book around data-driven information and measurement. But it's really the incentives, so the motivation, going from kind of a ground zero foundation to an inventory around your people, your policies, your procedures, your performance management. How is that even measured? How is it motivated? How is it recognized? Then getting into the imperatives around objectives, goals, measures, et cetera, right? So it's kind of almost, and I've been in organizations that will literally skip those very foundational steps and say, how do we go further, faster? How do we get here? How do we improve? How do we just keep going? How do we do this? How do we do that? And not just kind of starting, it feels like, oh, we're regressing. No, not necessarily. Just kind of like taking an inventory of the past and seeing that motivation still lies, and then get into those insights, the impacts, et cetera. So again, just in summation, kind of just looking at the opposite, the regression, the stagnation, the rigid, the antiquated, and what's our comfort here, right? So that we can get past that and look a little bit more forward.
Thanks, Frank. Who'd like to add on to that one?
One thing I would add is that in the old days, I keep saying that, but previously times, I'm sorry, we would deliver a training program and expect everybody to take it and learn and do things like that. We measure attendance but as I found with my students, there's different kinds of learners. Some people are very good at adaptive disruptions, complexity. Others are more linear in their thinking. And so you can't just apply one thing that think everybody's going to work. We also took a group of students to Amsterdam last year, focused on sustainability. And the one place that generated the most interest was a place that you could smell it, you could taste it, you could feel it. We appeal to the human senses, the 5 senses or 6 senses. And those kind of things, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, we need to incorporate those into the way we teach people, the way people learn. Organizations finally doing that in the way they set up, or office setup. But we need to appeal to more of those, I don't know if to call them intangible, but things like, how we learn, what motivates me, does the smell, do I see a waterfall, things like that I really think can appeal to human spirit, that can allow us to really engage people individually and have them learn on their own.
Thanks, Ray.
I love that you talked about the differences in learners, Wayne. I think that's really, really key. I'm going to add the opposite end of that continuum and say there are systemic reasons in organizations, systemic barriers that will work against you unless you find them and knock them down. So, for example, companies that have billable hours, guess what? Learning is not billable time. So you can build whatever program you want. You could tell them they will win some major prize if they come and complete. But if it's going to count against their billable hours, they're not coming. And so, I have actually worked with finance departments to redefine how the learning hours could be allocated so it wasn't a ding against their billables, because that was the barrier that was going to prevent any learning from happening.
That's a really, really good point. I've certainly seen that firsthand. Yes.
And I'm just going to add, again, the finances. Sometimes we don't have it in the budget. Sometimes we are small enough or we're too big, and to be able to, do a $1,000 reimbursement, especially in the economy today, we are being more conscientious as a business as to where we are spending our money. So, finances, I think, is definitely a big barrier for many organizations across the board. But again, just making sure that you're knocking on every door in the sense of look for grants, look for, what your state can do, what, in some countries, like I mentioned, there is the EBT for California, and some other states don't offer that, right? But they offer something very similar to it. And so I think just making sure that you're knocking on every door, looking for grants, looking for funding, when you don't have the resources in your organization is super duper key to help to continue with growing your staff.
Yeah, maybe I'm going to blend this a bit as well in terms of the billable hours and the learning. Sometimes I think as we've progressed, a way of learning can actually, or maybe it's the most effective way of learning is actually in action, actually, doing the work. So you can be doing the billable work and you can be learning as well. And you can, and I think just, reflecting on what you've done and mentoring mentors, checking what you've done is a way of learning and improving in a continuous way. Which will lead me into my next question, because we've Wayne's spoken quite a bit about agile, and I think this is where I see agile practices really can be a big part of the learning. And so I'm just wondering, Wayne, how can like being an agile leader, how can you promote a mindset that encourages this growth and this learning? And it can be, twinking it in, on billable work is where you're learning. It doesn't have to be in a classroom.
Yeah. Well, just sometimes when I use the word agile leader, people kind of start to roll their eyes and kind of glaze over and say, "Well, that's for IT, isn't it?" And it's a reality, and it's not just HR, finance, sales, other people I've talked with, and so it's an explanation around. We're just taking the essence of what Agile's about and applying it to business, experimentation, breaking things down, measurements, engaging the customer. And so I think Melissa brought up a really good point about systems. Do we have the systems in place in an organization that facilitate learning? if we're monitoring people by the number of phone calls they make, that's not going to really promote learning unless we take those phone calls and say, well, what do we learn from each phone call and how can we inculcate that to other people? So I think those systems have been slow to change. Oftentimes we're relying on HRIS systems that are set up, and not some of them are not as flexible as others, but I think individual managers can do a lot more on their own in terms of helping people be accountable, again, modeling the right behaviors, providing opportunities for growth, stopping meetings and saying, what do we learn from this? Having retrospectives, big part of Agile is looking back so we can look forward. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? Having Agile-like meetings. In an Agile meeting, we ask 3 questions. What do we do? What are we going to do today? What did we do yesterday? What's getting in the way? Those help identify problems early on versus weeks later. And so make learning part of those meetings. What you learned today, what are you going to learn tomorrow, and what's going to prevent you from doing that? And then hold people accountable for that. And that's the way the model of behavior. You have to really facilitate autonomy, let people come to you with their ideas, give them permission to go forward and try different things, have pilot programs. A lot of organizations are working with pilots. I'm not talking about a big, massive $100 million project. I'm talking about $100, $500 projects that people can work on. And if one of those work, then you'll be successful. It's a lot better than if one $500 million project doesn't work. And so it's a different way to look at things that I think that could promote an Agile leaders to really encourage this.
Yeah, I really like that, Wayne. Thank you. Anyone else want to add on to your experiences? All right. And then you've started to answer this one already, but I'll just call it out, being explicit about the modeling, about the leaders. What are some, like we've probably got a number of leaders in the audience. So what are some particular specific actions can they take to adopt this mindset, this learning Agile mindset? And again, anyone can have a go at that. Doesn't have to be Wayne.
Well, I think Wayne tackled a good chunk of that, right? The questions that a leader should ask their direct reports, right? Those kinds of questions. What I would add is that the next level leader should be integrating into their team meetings and their one-to-ones. What are you hearing from your team? What are they learning? Give me an example of something where somebody's stretching and trying new things. What pilots are going on? Because when leaders ask questions, people start to learn. They need to be prepared to answer those questions. And they will start then asking the questions of their directs because they need to report back in. So it's more than a rubber stamp of, are you doing this? Are you having one-to-ones and are you asking your team this? But actually the leaders up the food chain being sufficiently curious to understand what's happening deeper in the organization and asking those questions will enable those behaviors and embed them throughout the chain of command.
Thanks, Melissa. All right, so we might just briefly come back to measurement, and I'll ask Frank, what measurements can help foster learning?
There's so many. And it goes back to, I think, the why and how it ties into the objectives and the agility of the organization, and so many different measurements out there. And I think if you lock down the why before you go after the measurements. But what I will say, and again, I would love to hear from my fellow panelists. I always learn too from you all. I think a great way to approach this also is a 40. And so 60-40 is kind of a way to look at an individual's kind of relationship build, but it also can be looked at from a team and even an organization. And what I mean by 60-40 is being honest and okay with 60% of the kind of motivation is not you. You're not going to change somebody's motivation, their ideas, their values, no matter what. You know, you can create some inspiration, a spark, an engagement, etc., for whatever objective you have. But again, 40% is going to be truly the behavior, the conformity. We've all been in organizations that where we bring our 100% authentic self and then we dial it down maybe to 90, 80. Hopefully you don't lose track of who you are, but you dial it down. And that's part of the conformity, because what you're doing is this is all your learned experiences around not just learning, but the norms, the social norms around your organization. So when I look at, you know, assessments, I'm thinking too, is there an assessment, whether it be from engagement, good call out, Melissa, or some sort of, you know, inventory catalog of what are the social norms here? Who influences that? And once again, how is that rewarded and recognized? Because we have to focus almost at the end, project management style, ADGAR, you have to look at what are the reinforcements around there. You have to look, you know, Kirkpatrick style, you have to look about the outputs and the behaviors kind of in first. And that really is driven by the outputs there. And I would say there's great research to back that up, right? From a learning, once you do develop it and how great it is in the learning organization, you know, sometimes we make it mandatory. And mandatory, there's a great meta-analysis out there, get the author, but you know, that will create a masterful around the objectives, not necessarily maybe the behavior, versus once you develop it, almost a voluntary learning, you know, an experience, you know, here's that, you have a mastery at that point of, you know, not just behavior, but possibly the motivation. So it's almost an assessment of, number one, who are the influencers in your organization, and what is that kind of status quo, that environment, you know, and how is it reinforced? And then number two, outside of mandatory compliance driven, we have to all do this learning experiences, what are often the ones that folks gravitate towards that are not mandatory? It gives you a really great assessment of the learning environment of your organization and kind of that behavior, the conformity or non-conformity or the true innovation that folks really like to go to, right? Instead of this feedback loop of, you know, the same things and breaking a bit of that feedback loop. So again, the 60-40, 60% will never change 100% the motivations. I come with my own values, my experiences for X amount of years, apparently with, you know, Wayne, that goes back to Socrates once again. So he's got a lot of lived experiences. You will not create some sort of additional agile kind of mindset, but you can motivate the behaviors around the environment, that 40%. Yeah.
Thanks, Frank. I might, there's been lots of great comments being made and some questions. And I liked a comment by Aaron about so much learning can be done at a low cost and really can drive big outcomes. And what's the panel's thought on that little thought bubble?
I agree. I mean, there's definitely somebody else had mentioned LinkedIn Learning that, you know, they, in some cases, some of it is actually free. You know, so realistically, looking at all your resources, the same thing, like, for example, for us in HR, what do we do? Oh, there's a free webinar on this. There's a free seminar on this. Oh, I need to go there. You know, so taking advantage of those can go a long way. So I completely agree with Aaron. The, you know, low cost, free stuff can definitely go a long way.
I had a little celebration in my head when I saw Aaron's comment. So kudos to you, Aaron. I'm very much in favor of that, because one of the things that we are at risk for is continuing to consider learning as education, and it's not learning unless it's a program. And we need to be learning and growing every day. So, you know, when we think about programs, that's money. I like to think death by 1,000 cuts, learning by 1,000 tips. So, like, what's the tip you might have learned? You know, if you read a tweet and you posted it on your computer and you changed your behavior, having read that tweet and reminded you of every day. It took 3 seconds and it was free. So we need to find these things that inspire us and help us see the world differently and try on new behaviors that feel like they're a good fit. Throughout the course of our day, through feedback from other people is free. It feels like it costs a lot of money, but it's free. So amplifying feedback within the system is a freebie that will drive performance as well. So I love thinking about the free stuff too, Cindy. There's a preponderance of it, right? But it's also, what are we sharing with other people, and how are we reflecting on that to actually drive our behavior? That's going to get a whole lot more traction, perhaps, than even a one-day course when it's, a one and done, right? It's about that continuous learning.
I think
When you think about
95% of learning is not in the classroom.
No.
It's in the flow of the work, right? Little kids learn from their parents by watching and mimicking and trying. And so I think that's the same way in the organization. The challenge is we haven't really kind of explicitly focused on that. We have a meeting, we do certain things, person says, I never thought about that. Stop the meeting, say, that's an interesting point. What do you guys think about that? Let's learn from that. It's those little instances that come up on a regular basis that we need to capture, and somehow you promote learning that way. So again, I love big on co-creation. I don't agree that HR has to come up with all the ideas, but I think the employees themselves can come up with different ideas about learning. People are already learning on the outside. They're doing things outside of work. What can they bring inside that could be helpful? We believe that most of people's talents aren't really used in the organization. Their hobbies have vocations that you do outside. Can we bring those inside? Can they be helpful in terms of advancing themselves in the organization?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Again, Wayne. All right, we've only got 8 minutes left. That's crazy. This conversation could go on for much, much longer.
Can we extend it for a couple hours for Melissa's suggestion?
So, and in fact, to the point about again taking value for money learning. I mean, these hacking HR panels, which they're a great value for the cost of them. That's for sure. So in our 8 minutes, so the next question I have is just being practical, primarily for our audience type members would be, what strategies can they take to their organizations to implement this culture of continuous learning we're talking about? And I'll come to you, Melissa, on this one, if you want to get us going on that.
Sure. And I'm going to emphasize practical, because I think the tendency is to over orchestrate and try to build too big. And that's why we don't, to Wayne's point earlier, come back with a program for 6 months. That's not in the spirit of continuous learning and being agile, right? So don't over orchestrate. I would recommend focusing on building psychological safety. I would focus on tapping into what already exists. So, beefing up those one-to-ones, the hiring guides, helping leaders integrate into their meetings we had talked about. And then if you're going to offer some training to support, I would work on amplifying feedback and teaching everyone in the organization how to coach. Because when the organization has a language that enables them to ask open-ended, non-judgmental questions, and people welcome those and they understand why they're being asked and they're getting feedback, you're juicing the system to do what you want and encouraging the behaviors that you want, and the rest will follow. I'm curious to hear what other people have to add.
Thanks, Melissa. What do other people want?
Oh, no, go ahead, Wayne.
Go ahead, Frank.
Can I say, I think this is going to sound so cliche, but model the way and be the first to change. So I'll share a really quick story. I've experienced so many changes, and even more recently had a new person added to my team. And given the work that you do, start with some sort of assessment or learning there, even with your team meetings. So this person's been added. We've had our one-on-one. I do equity, inclusion, belonging work, but I play in spaces around digital and vendor supply diversity and marketing and communications and so many different facets. But I was like, I had a fear myself. I was like, you know what? Let's do some learning in this up and coming. I was like, so got this Korn Ferry inspired assessment around who we are, because that's the work we do. How dare we ask others to journey around who they are if we're not comfortable? So I was like, I don't know this person's comfort level. Okay. So I sent out that to the team and say, hey, I'd love to spend a good chunk of the time. Here's an inspired assessment. You can opt out. It's voluntary. It's an assessment for us and the work that we do. Happy, boom. And, wow, I just listened. They did do the assessment, including our newest person. It got us deeper into the work we do. And then this is something that we can, from our team, share and model for other teams. So regardless if you're in finance and marketing, whatever expertise you have, spend some time. I love how Melissa said, right, around the learning around 1,000 tips is, just start with your team, carry it out to your function, carry it out to organization, model that. We also have an IVP season where we, by function, can sign up for a season, what we call for season for growth or grow yourself. You sign up as a function and kind of like a town hall style, report out the beautiful things about your organization. Take that time to share the learnings. And if you all don't have any organizations, infiltrate that. It's low cost or no cost except for your time.
Thanks, Frank. Anyone want to add on to Frank's?
I would just say that I think we need to celebrate innovation, continuous learning. We need to recognize those. Companies have hackathons. They have Academy Awards for new ideas. They have whatever. Use your imagination. I think if we can have, in the town hall meeting, are we recognizing innovative ideas? Now, realize that some people will never come up with innovative ideas. They just don't think that way, but others will. And so it's really, have we in our rituals, in our culture, do we explicitly recognize continuous learning by rewarding people and showcasing different things and stuff like that? So I think that's one of the areas I would focus on.
Thanks, Wayne. All right. So before we wrap up, I'll ask you one final question for everybody to answer, and that is, what's one actionable step HR leaders, organizations can take today just to begin enhance their journey to being a true learning organization? So we might start with Sandy. We'll go counterclockwise this time.
Okay. Well, I would definitely say, what's your budget? Do you know what your budget is? If you don't have a budget, find a budget for it, right? Find the sources. I would say that would be one big one.
Mm-hmm. That's very good. Wayne.
Yeah, I would. The one thing I would do would be to integrate learning into daily work. When you're having meetings, stop and say, what's learning from this? What did we learn? What can we learn from that? So you'll have these opportunities come up 100 times a day. And so by continuously mentioning those and stopping explicitly talking about them, I think that's any manager could do, regardless, you don't need any money for that, just really a mindset to really zero in on learning that people can see.
Yeah, that's a great tip and an easy one to implement.
I'm going to double click on Wayne's and I'm going to add, make sure there's consensus around what psychological safety means. It means different things to different people because there is a specific definition for it, but it sounds like it's layman's terms and people seem to project what they want on it, and it prevents people from getting aligned around what they need to do to support learning. So if you can build an understanding of what psychological safety is, that'll get you off and running.
Yeah, I think that's
it's about learning. Learning can be contagious if you're enthused about it. Enthusiasm is contagious. So be enthused.
Love that. So love the whole panels. And so thank you for sharing the insights, practical advice we've had today. So we've covered a lot of ground, from the characteristics of a learning organization, agile approaches, overcoming barriers, So it's been a wonderful panel, and I look forward to learning in future Hacking HR panels and with the panelists here in the future as well. So thanks everyone today, and thanks for those who joined us today for the panel, and yeah, have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rob, for staying up late to facilitate this too.
My pleasure.
Exactly.
Thank you.